I think in our society, we're given a lot of things to do instead of feel, a lot of things to consume instead of feel. And yet that's how we stay bound and addicted and unhappy.
On this episode of the Psychology Podcast, I chat with Emma Seppala about reclaiming yourself and setting yourself free. Sounds good, right? I've known Emma since grad school, and she consistently puts out good vibes and teaches us how to have healthy bodies and minds. In this episode, we discuss what Emma refers to as sovereign, which is designed to emancipate you from the many ways in which you knowingly or unknowingly subjugate yourself at every level of your existence, from yourself to your emotions, to your mind, to your relationships, to your intuition, and to your body. Emma shows us how we bind ourselves and how we can reclaim our sovereignty. Emma is a very wise and compassionate human, and I think you'll learn stuff in this episode you can apply in your life right away to reconnect with yourself in a very healthy way. So without further ado, I bring you Emma Seppala. Emma.
Hi, Scott.
How you doing?
Good to see you. Good to hear you.
Good to see you too. Congrats on your new book.
Thank you.
Sovereign. Reclaim your freedom, energy, and power in a time of distraction, uncertainty, and chaos. Wow. Well, I think a lot of people are really yearning for that right now. So, this major theme of this new book is setting yourself free, and its opposite state, which you refer to as the bound state, where through life experiences, fear, and trauma, we start to disconnect from ourselves. So you're really contrasting these things, and hopefully we can help our listeners and viewers, if they're watching the YouTube channel right now, help them set themselves free. No one can do it but themselves, right? We can't do it for them.
Yeah, so true. And that's the whole goal of this book.
I know. I know. I read your book.
Oh, you are awesome, Scotty.
Well, thank you. Go on. Stop. So where do we even start with this? Can you describe to me how you conceive of the concept of energy? I mean, there's so many places to start in this discussion, but I see that word interwoven quite a bit throughout the book.
Yes.
And can you just kind of tell me what you think of that word?
I love that as a first question, Scott.
Thank you.
Because in many ways, as I'm contrasting the bound state and the sovereign state, the bound state is really everything that drains us of our energy. It's the beliefs we hold, the behavior patterns we have, the addictive behaviors that we have, the ways we conceive of ourselves and the ways we interpret the world that drain our energy, the way that we interact with people that drain our energy. And when we're in a sovereign state, that's the opposite. We're filling our own tank, we're maintaining it, but we're also filling others' tanks. So it's a pattern that goes through all of the different chapters. As one example, just as one belief that drains us is, whenever I've asked audiences how many people are self-critical, almost every single person raises their hand. And as you know, self-criticism, the psychological definition is that it's a form of self-loathing. And when you think about that, just, that the majority of people are walking around with this, you could think of it as social conditioning or programming, like viral programming that runs in families and runs in societies and does us no favors and drains us of our energy. That's one example.
How do we get bounded, and disconnected from ourselves? And, throughout the course of our lives, can our relationship with ourselves change depending on life circumstances?
Absolutely. And I think that's the journey, right? That's the journey of and it starts with awareness, like being aware of the many ways that we engage with behaviors or thought patterns that drain our energy. Another example is our emotions. And I know you think about this a lot too. And that most people, when you ask, well, what have you learned about what to do with your emotions, your big, bad, negative ones, people will say, well, just suppress them, right? Just suck it up, buttercup. That's pretty much what everyone is up to. There's some exceptions, in some Latin cultures in southern Italy, but even then, there are certain emotions that are just not acceptable and that are suppressed. And when we look at the research, suppression basically increases the negative emotion. and it's more likely to come out somatically, through health stuff, or it's going to explode or come out as passive aggression and destroying both ourselves and others in the process. So that's just sort of one example of that, and how the journey towards becoming more sovereign with regards to our emotions is to learn to actually feel them. Just like a child will feel their emotions 100%, and then it moves through them. Just like, so going back to that theme of energy, the child lets the energy of the emotion move through them, and then they're done a few minutes later, as opposed to adults who can hold on to an emotion forever. Not to say that I'm encouraging exploding our emotions all over the place, but the ability to feel. And I think in our society, we're given a lot of things to do instead of feel, a lot of things to consume instead of feel. And yet that's how we stay bound and addicted and unhappy.
What does a healthy self-esteem look like?
Well, I always just ask, like, what are some of the things that people say to themselves when they make a big mistake, right? When you ask people that, they usually say words like, you're such an idiot, you don't belong here, not good enough, those kinds of words. And, whenever I hear that, it's just so heartbreaking to hear how people talk to themselves. During the pandemic, I would teach on Zoom, and I would ask this question: what do you say to yourself when you make a big mistake? And people would write it in the chat, and you'd see one thing after another of these heartbreaking words that people tear themselves up with. And when you think about it, it doesn't make any sense, because what would you say to your best friend? You would say, what would you say to your best friend? You would say, oh, you're okay. Everybody makes mistakes. You're totally fine. We'd be so encouraging and loving to them. Why do we have a self-destructive relationship with ourselves? We talk about being in a toxic relationship or a toxic workplace. Most people are walking around with a toxic relationship with their own self. What about that makes sense? It doesn't, but it keeps people bound. This one study found that 80% of millennials endorse the belief, I am not good enough with regards to most areas of their life. Can you believe that? It's so heartbreaking. And so I always think, what would happen to this world if every single person had a sovereign relationship with themselves? I mean, how would they show up? They would be able to show up in their full potential, be their freaking best selves and rock stars like Scott Barry Kaufman.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, you got me thinking that I think I might start using the phrase, instead of self-esteem, what we really need is a healthy self-relationship. I like, just thought of that phrase, self-relationship. Yeah, instead of self-esteem. Yeah.
Totally. And why wouldn't you? I mean, the only relationship you're guaranteed for the rest of your life is with yourself. Might as well make it a good one, right? Or a friendship, a romance. And what happens then, I always think, like, how are you going to show up on the battlefield of your life? Are you going to show up, limping because you kicked yourself there, or in brand spanking new shining armor because you loved your way there? How are you going to be strongest? And yeah, so that's just something I think about. And Maya Angelou has this beautiful quote where she says, I've learned a long time ago that the only thing that, forgetting now the exact quotes, I've learned a long time ago that the only thing that makes sense is to be on my own side. Something like that. And then Audre Lorde has another really great quote, and she says, or self-care is not self-indulgence. It's an act of political warfare. So powerful. And she was the self-described gay Black woman in a white straight man's world, so she was battling a lot of battles as an activist and writer and so forth. But it was so powerful what she said. That's how you're going to show up. You're going to show up powerfully if you show up with that self-care.
Wow, well, that's really powerful, Emma. You've done some terrific, groundbreaking research in our field on the neuroscience of emotion regulation. I'd be remiss not to have you review some of your most recent findings, or the highlights of some of your findings. What are some of the highlights of your findings, and why, as adults, Well, and also, why don't children learn this stuff? We're never taught this.
I know, Scott. It's so weird. I always just think like no matter how many MDs, PhDs, black belts, dishes you know how to cook, languages you know how to speak, most people are running around with as much education about how to handle their big, bad, negative emotions as a 5-year-old, which is basically no formal education. I mean, you're supposed to,
Well,
like the two hardest things we're supposed to manage in our life, which are emotions and relationships, we never get any training on. And they cause so much pain, And so, yeah, I mean, we were looking specifically, I was looking at trauma. So after 9/11, I was living in New York during 9/11, and I had a lot of anxiety after that day. And I tried a lot of things to help me at the time. I tried mindfulness. I'd go to like hot yoga and I do all this stuff. And I was still shaking. I was still shaking at 8:30 in the morning. And then I walked into a breathing class called Sky Breath Meditation, which was a breathing class that was offered at Columbia by some fellow students through an organization called Art of Living. And I was like, okay, what is this? And I learned the breathing practices, and then I felt, wow, like I feel like I can move on. I regained my sovereignty over my anxiety. So fast forward, and did my doctoral program in psychology, and I was doing a postdoc and working with veterans with trauma. Yeah. We're coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and many of them had gone through traditional therapeutic or pharmaceutical treatments, and they hadn't helped them. They were self-medicating, like in their basement, smoking weed or drinking, etc. And so I thought, this helped me so many years ago. Let's see if we can help them with breathing. And that was one of the first studies that we ran with a breathing protocol, with doing on the sky breath meditation for a week. And then we looked at their anxiety pre-post, 1 month post and 1 year post. And we also looked at physiological measures of startle response and so forth. And what we found was that after 1 week, their anxiety had normalized. I mean, compared to the control group, they had really, some of them no longer qualified as having post-traumatic stress. And then when we looked at the physiology of it, we saw really strong correlation between their reduction in startle response and their reduction in anxiety. So the correlation was like 0.9. Now, this is something crazy. And then 1 month later, and 1 month later and 1 year later, they had maintained they had maintained what they had experienced after that first week. So their anxiety was normalized. And it was interesting because many of them hadn't continued their breathing practice. And so that was really cool. It was like as if, there's a way to sort of stabilize the nervous system, even if you have gone through trauma, through breathing. And I think, to me, that makes sense because a lot of psychological approaches are through the mind, like change your thoughts, change your mind, change your life, and
that's true.
I think that can work to a certain extent. And I think it does work, being grateful and so forth. We know that works. But when there is a really intense trauma, really intense anxiety, it's lodged in the body. The memory is, and just think about one veteran, he said, I'll stand in front of the mall, and I'm here in Madison, Wisconsin, and I know there's no danger in the mall, but I still have to brace myself for 20 minutes before I can go in, because his mind is doing fine. It's just that the trauma in the body, the memory in the body is bringing up so much anxiety. And so what we think is happening is that through breathing, there's this combination. You're not just addressing the mind, you're also addressing the nervous system.
Tell me a little more about that, because I've been a bit critical of the trauma-obsessed culture we live in now, and also the obsession with the body keeps the score. So I actually would like to hear more about this. Please educate me.
Absolutely. No, and I'm fascinated by it myself, because we've run a number of other studies subsequent to this and found some really interesting stuff. So,
educate us.
One thing we think is happening is that as the veterans are doing their breathing practice, they go into this deep parasympathetic state of just calm, and in that moment, it's sometimes these memories come up. They can come up in the form of a flashback. They come up in the form of simply a smell, a feeling, a physiological sensation. But they're in a deep parasympathetic state. So usually when they're having a flashback or a memory, they're back in sympathetic activation as if they were in the trauma that they experienced. And that's why post-traumatic stress doesn't allow you to move on, because it's as if that trauma is still right there in front of you, right now, or every time it's triggered, right?
Wow.
And they're not able to sleep for that reason. They're constantly in high activation. And what happens with the breathing, we believe, is that as they're going into this parasympathetic state and the memory may be coming up, there's like a decoupling that happens between the
Hmm.
physiological activation and the memory. And so what they have said to us is, I remember everything that happened, but I can move on. And they got off their sleep meds, anxiety meds, and
Wow.
sometimes I get in touch with them because like a reporter wants to talk to them or something, and some of them were like, I honestly don't remember what that was like. I'm like, I can't believe you don't remember what that was like. You were living in your basement, going through a divorce, and you couldn't even show up at work, So talk about sovereignty. How can we regain sovereignty? I mean, so many people have gone through trauma, and many psychological approaches do work and do help, and exposure therapy does help, in some cases. And in other cases, there are people that fall through the cracks, and many veterans have fallen through the cracks. And there's been a very, very high suicide rate, as you probably know, daily. It's a horrible amount. And I wanted to see, is there another way that we can bridge that gap, that we can catch those that are falling? And we subsequently ran another study with the Palo Alto VA, the larger a larger group of veterans, including both men and women,
Well.
and it was it was a design where it was side by side with the gold standard therapeutic treatment, cognitive processing therapy, and the design was such that we wanted to see if the breathing intervention was at least as good as that one. I'm forgetting the name of it now off the top of my head, but that's what the statistical what the stats are that you're conducting on it, and that's what was found, that was at least as good as the gold standard therapy. And then looking at just the physiology too of emotion regulation, those that had gone through the breathing program as opposed to the therapy showed better emotion regulation at the physiological level. So again, because I think what's happening with breathing is that something is going on at with the nervous system. It's not just cognitive. And so that's just really fascinating. And then another study we ran here at Yale, looking at, so Yale undergraduates tend to have worse and worse mental health as the semester goes on. They're high, type A, and just getting more and more anxious and depressed with time. And so we want. What do you say?
That tracks to my personal experience.
Yeah, you remember that, Scott? We met at Yale all those years ago. Oh, it was so fun. Yeah. Exactly. So what we wanted to see is, can we provide a buffer to prevent this from happening? So we randomly assigned students it was about 200 students, I think. We randomly assigned them to one of 3 well-being interventions or a control group. So it was either this sky breath meditation, the breathing, or it was mindfulness-based stress reduction, or it was emotional intelligence, which is mostly cognitive skills, or the control group. And we wanted to see which one of these was going to help the students most. And what we saw was that the breathing group had the most impact of all. And I think it's because it probably brings together a lot of the elements from the others, has both the physiological breathing component, but also brings together the mindfulness, because what we saw was that mindfulness scores increased thanks to the breathing. And then it has some cognitive, you're better able to take in any kind of cognitive information when you've addressed the anxiety that's at the level of the body. Yeah.
Can you give our listeners a concrete practice? Can you teach us something right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what we researched is a program that takes a couple days to learn. It's like a whole protocol, like a 20-minute protocol. But what I can teach you now is something real simple that you can keep in your back pocket. You've
taught me stuff in the past to help me get through my flying anxiety. You have.
Oh my gosh, fantastic. I don't remember that.
A while ago.
Yeah. Oh, good. Did it help?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so a real simple thing that people can take away from just listening today. So when you breathe in, your heart rate increases, and when you breathe out, it slows down. And if you're in a nurse's office, you can really scare them by exhaling for a really long time and seeing what happens to your heart rate. But what we're going to do today is I can lead us through a real. Do you want me to lead us through an exercise? Yeah, I'll lead us through a short exercise. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. And
I know you get paid big bucks to do this, so you're being everyone, Emma's being very generous right now
oh
doing this.
gosh, I don't know if I, but so what we're just going to do is lengthen our exhales for a while with our eyes closed. So before we start changing our breath, you can just close your eyes and have your palms open on your lap. And then you want to breathe in for a count of 1. Hold on. Before you start breathing, before you start breathing, I just want you to assess where you are right now. So just assessing your level of energy, noticing, how many thoughts are going on in your own mind. So you could have a lot of thought traffic, or not a lot. Just sort of noticing your own state of mind first, so you can see if there's a shift from before to after. And then for the breathing, you want to breathe in for a count of 1, 2, 3, 4, hold. And then you can breathe out for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you're breathing out for either twice as long or a time and a half as long as you breathe in. You want to do that for about 5 minutes and then reassess sort of where you're at. And then that's a practice that you can take with you. Do you want me to guide us through it, or? Yeah?
I'm doing it right now.
Okay, so I'll keep guiding us then for a few minutes. Okay, so breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, and breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, and breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, and breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, and breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One more time. Deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold, and breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then come back to normal breath and just assess any shifts or changes in the state of your mind. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes and notice how you feel with the eyes open.
I opened my eyes already, Emma, gotta admit. Amazing. Yeah, no, it really does help do something to my parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
Does something.
Yeah, it's a way to gain sovereignty, right? I mean, look, all the time throughout the day, we have so much media coming at us. We have so many things, so many people, so many demands. And sometimes we can just rush through the day and there's all this stuff in our head from everything we've been accumulating. And then you arrive somewhere, either at your office and you want to just be focusing, or at home and you want to be focusing on your loved ones, but your mind is completely cluttered with everything that's been happening and you're not able to be present with what you want to do. And, having sovereignty over our mind is being able to bring it back into a place where it can be aware and present with what's going on, and calmer, and able to, we know from research that when you're calmer, you're a better decision maker, you have better emotional intelligence, you're more focused, better attention, better memory, and you're more creative, right? So all the things.
That's true. That's true. The emotion regulation and trauma narrative link is really interesting to me, because I feel like trauma has exploded in our society, where it was once confined to like veterans and others with diagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder. Now it's every student I teach, it's everyone on TikTok, everyone. And everything is blamed on their trauma as well. So to a certain degree, trauma is a higher level conscious construction of an event. It's a label that we're putting on an event. And of course, you are quite right to point out that there are bodily bottom up effects. There's top down, but there's also bottom up effects that can linger, especially under triggering situations that are related. But now everyone's being triggered by everything. You're a very, very compassionate. I mean, I've known you a long time, Emma. You are a very, very. You have like a very like motherly way of being to the world at large. Just my
Thank you.
observation. Just my
Thank you,
observation.
Scotty.
Now,
Thank you.
I am not you. So I think some people need to toughen the fuck up. Is what I'm saying. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Now
Yes.
work with me here. Work with me here.
Yeah.
Let's meet in the middle. Let's meet in the middle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's meet in the middle because, one thing I talk about also is, you know, yes, things may have happened to you, to most people. Some things happen. You've had a car accident, you had a tough youth, you had a tough breakup, you've had
Yeah.
your mourning, yes, those things happen. And in that sense, we are victims of those situations. And yet, I do really, from the bottom of my heart, believe that when we hold on to that victimhood, we are keeping ourselves in a bound state because we are not,
No.
it kind of keeps us in that place. Like, okay, I'll share, for myself, I was in an abusive marriage. Okay. So
No, no.
like, I know what it's like to be in a situation like that. And yet if I stay in the, I'm
Yeah,
a victim of, a domestic violence, I am identifying with a disempowered position
that's
as
right.
opposed to I am, I lived through that. I learned through that. I grew through that. I'm stronger for it. And I'm more sovereign now. But
Very.
sovereignty, I think, is really reclaiming that post traumatic growth, not so much focusing on the victimhood, which can painfully keep us in a place of feeling abused.
Mm,
This is a tricky line to walk because I'm not saying no, you didn't have trauma. Yes, you had trauma, and
right.
yet it is in your favor to identify with the fact that you have survived it, you're growing from it, and you're stronger for it, and you're not having that happen to you ever again.
Well,
The
yeah, yeah. Well,
warrior.
yeah. Well, I love what you're saying. The idea though that trauma is something objective as opposed to a subjective thing, though. It's interesting because um, there's so many different definitions of trauma in the psychological literature.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we
Mm-hmm.
all agree in the literature, on this term. And if a student is traumatized that they have homework, is that a fair use of the word trauma?
No.
I just feel like the word trauma is being used now. Like everyone's being
Mm-hmm.
traumatized as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to I'm upset or I'm anxious. It's now I'm traumatized. Now
Right.
I think there are things we can all. I mean, there's a list of things we can all agree. I think the ACE checklist is still valid. But there are so many things now that are falling under that
Mm-hmm.
purview for young people. Um,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that?
Well, they're not by going deep into that as a victim, they're disempowering themselves. And that's a problem,
Yeah,
because then they're not accessing, their inner core strength and belief in themselves that, yeah, like this is hard for me and I can
yeah,
get through this. And I'm a freaking warrior. We've all been through hard times. And even just looking back on it, you can be like, wow, I went through that and
yeah,
I can do this. I can do this
yeah,
again. And I could do it with more wisdom. I could do it with more compassion. I can do it. I've gone through suffering and I'll continue to go through suffering because that's human life. And I can do
yeah.
this.
Well, that's lovely. That's a lovely attitude. I mean, you are very forward looking, which is what I mean. I'm very much in line with that for sure. Your research has spanned multiple areas. You've also studied intuition and gut feelings. You argue we have an instinct for self-preservation that we often ignore. But you do argue that we can make better decisions in our lives if we can gain some sovereignty over that. Could you elaborate a little more on your research relating to that? I'm so curious about that instinct for self-preservation because my hero Carl Rogers called it the we have an organismic valuing system in our body, is what he
Mm.
argued. I have renamed that in my coaching program too. We have a self-actualizing compass in our body,
Yes.
so it's even more than
Yes.
self-preservation. It's
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
I
So it
love
seems
that,
connected.
Scotty.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Well, that's
yay.
sovereignty, right? Self-actualization is sovereignty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think, when I was a grad student, I was a grad student in James Gross's lab at Stanford, which was the emotion
Amazing.
regulation lab.
He's amazing.
And I
Yeah.
love him. He was an amazing mentor. He is an amazing, I mean, to this day, he's my hero.
Yeah.
And, one of the studies that was really interesting was that in the lab, we looked at suppression. What happens when you suppress emotion? Now,
Hmm.
when someone is suppressing anger, let's say I were suppressing anger and I'm talking to you and I'm pretending I'm not angry. I'm like, nope, I'm fine. Everything's fine, right? Let's say that your heart rate would increase. So in your cognitively, you wouldn't understand, okay, you wouldn't understand why you're feeling not so, you want to back away or you want to get out of there. Sometimes you have that feeling like, I can't explain it, but I just don't have a good vibe. I need to move. I need to get out of here. Well, what happens is that physiologically, you've already registered that I'm suppressing emotion. You've registered inauthenticity. And inauthenticity, from an instinctual point of view, registers as threat. So even animals, I'll give you an example with equine facilitated therapy. So when a therapist uses a horse to work with let's say a child with anxiety, right? And the child pretends not to be scared of the horse, the child will come up and be like, I'm not scared of that horse, I'm just fine. But if that child is scared, the horse is moving all over the place and is anxious. And the horse doesn't understand English, right? But the
Yeah.
horse is registering inauthenticity, and that registers as threat.
Yeah.
And we have the same thing. And we register inauthenticity as threat. Whether we realize it cognitively or not, our heart rate is going up. So I thought that was really fascinating. And then we have an instinct, which we can think of intuition as instinct. We can think of it as, putting the pieces of information together in the back of our mind. I mean, there are many ways that we can conceive of it. Joseph Michaels, who was my colleague at Stanford, he looked at decision making, and he thinks about intuition as your feeling. You say, I have a feeling this is a good idea or not. And what he found was that when decision making is complex, when you're weighing a lot of things, you're going to make a better decision if you go with your feelings rather than
But
just thinking through it reasonably. If the matter is simple, no big deal. But if it's complicated, you're going to make a better decision if you go with your gut feeling. So I think that's just really fascinating. That also ties into,
it
what you
is.
and I are really interested in with the whole idea of the creativity and where do you get your creative insights? Again, it's in from a place of relaxation, right? So you could think of it as, oh, my brain's putting together a puzzle in the background and I'm not realizing it. Or you could think of it as receptivity. Like Einstein, he would go and play Mozart, and then the ideas would come to him. How does that happen? However we think about it, it's a way of being receptive in a non-cognitive way that can save our lives. Like my friend Kushal was on 9/11. He walked into the second Twin Tower to get to his office, and then the building was hit, or it was, I don't know, remember which tower it was, but anyway, the building was hit, and the guards were giving orders to stay in the building. And Kushal hesitated for a moment, and he ran out of there, and he saved his life by a hair. And what would have happened if he hadn't listened to his gut? How many people in that building had the same gut feeling and didn't go with it, right? So, and this is an area of research that I think is going to grow a lot. It's already growing. There's a lot of interest, and the military's been researching it for decades. Under different names, and there was a movie that made fun of it called Men Who Stare at Goats. Did you see that movie?
Oh, never heard of that. Never heard of
Yeah,
that.
it was kind of making fun of that, but they're always starting new programs again because so many service members came back from Iraq and Afghanistan having reported using gut feelings to save their lives or save other people's lives. Oh, we didn't go down that road because I had a feeling, So now they're studying it again. It's sort of top secret, and nobody wants to talk about it, but it's happening, and I know it. I have some intelligence from that. Yeah.
So interesting. I don't know if you know, but my dissertation was on implicit learning.
No, I didn't know that.
Yes, yes, and its relationship to creativity. So I'm all about harnessing that power. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Tell
When
me about that.
Well, the regularities and statistical probabilities that we learn automatically and unconsciously throughout the course of our day, there are individual differences in it. I found some people are better at implicit learning than others,
Mm-hmm.
and that was unrelated to their IQ score. So they could have do well on IQ tests and see those patterns explicitly and consciously, but not be as good as at seeing the tacit areas of life.
Fascinating.
So yeah, yes, that's also true. And I found implicit learning was correlated with openness to experience, the personality trait.
Makes sense.
And yeah, which that in turn was correlated with creative achievement. But so yeah, no, I think that's really good. And you would argue that it's important to distinguish between just like a blind faith in one's emotions,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yes.
a more honed expert intuition.
Absolutely, because our feelings are always changing. It's not like you can just I'm just going to always go with my feelings. That could also make you really wishy-washy. Like we definitely have logic and reason there. And I like how Joe Michaels says, he says, when I have to make a big decision, of course I use my reason, but I also consult my feeling. And I think even just that invitation to consult one's feeling has been absent from our discourse, absent from our education, poo-pooed as like magical thinking. But actually, even when you're a parent, like mother's intuition, there's a word for that. Like we know what's going on with our kid better than, anyone else. And I also think that, making time for those moments, and I know you, Scott, you and I have talked about this a lot, about those moments of, the alpha wave moments in our lives where we are in a more relaxed state, whether it's through meditation or contemplation or being out in nature or playing music, listening to music, whatever it is that allows us to go into a more serene space. That's when you're more likely to sort of access those insights. And you also want to make sure that they're not being colored by your trauma or fear, right? It's like, oh, I have
Yeah.
a gut feeling I shouldn't go on stage. Well, maybe you're just really afraid to go on stage, but if you went up there, you'd be a rock star and you'd be helping people. So you should do it, right? So
Yes.
we have to make sure that we're not, we're not, we have to make sure that our feeling really is an intuition. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. You've tied a lot of this stuff to leadership too, right?
Mm-hmm. I do
And
that.
what do you think are like can you give me examples of any sovereign leaders? People you would say, "Oh, they're
Yes.
sovereign. They're sovereign. They're not bound." Do you think
Yes,
Trump
I
is
do.
bound? Do you think Trump is bound?
Oh, that's hilarious. I can't speak to I have no idea. He
Uh,
is definitely doing his own thing, but whether he is sovereign, I don't know because a sovereign state is one in which you're not caught up in uh, addictions, whether that's addiction to fame or addiction to money or pleasure. All those things are bound. Those are bondage, and it sounds like from his history may have some of that. But yes, I once met this. I was actually supposed to escort this woman. Her name is Lynn Tilton to a stage, and I hadn't met her before. And within minutes of her sitting next to me, seconds maybe, tears start rolling down my face. Scott, this is embarrassing. Here I am, her host. I'm supposed to bring her to the stage. She's going to speak at Stanford Business School. And she looks at me and she's like, I'm making you cry. And I'm like, what is happening to me? And I had this flash of insight at that moment that I had never met a woman who owned her sovereignty so completely in my life. And
hmm.
it almost shot a pang of pain in me, not just for myself, but for all women in particular. This was about 15 years ago. And it was sort of maybe a flash of insight, one of those, wow, and she is an incredible woman. Talk about working with her intuition. She definitely moves with her intuition, but she's also brilliant. But she, in fact, this is an intuition story herself. So she lost her father when she was in her teens, and experienced firsthand what it was like to have a main provider pass away in the family.
Hmm.
And so she got herself to Yale on a tennis scholarship. And
Hmm.
then at Yale, once she got married at Yale and then was pregnant shortly thereafter and a single mom.
Mm.
So she had to somehow support her child, and she went to Wall Street in the 80s as a woman. So she became financially successful, but was sexually harassed by both her colleagues and her clients constantly. So she finally decided to retire in her 30s, thinking, that's it, I'm out of here. And she moved to Florida, and then she had an intuition that came to her as a dream. And her father came to her and said, this is not what I had in mind for you. And she realized there was something else she was meant to do. And
Interesting.
she decided to make sure that no other families that she could help would ever have to deal with losing a main provider. And so she
Wow.
bought these companies that other people had given up on as, a lost cause, and turned them around. So think companies like Stila Makeup, like these are companies that even the consulting companies had given up on. She bought them just to make sure that people wouldn't lose their jobs. And she turned around all these companies. She's called the turnaround queen. She at one point had 700,000 employees. And this woman is incredible. And she dances to her own drum and has thereby shown up at her full potential and made such a difference. So it's just one example. And I do believe, yes, there are extraordinary people, but we all have extraordinary gifts. Every one of us, if we allow them through. And that comes through when we are sovereign, as opposed to caught up in ways of thinking and behaving that keep us bound. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, wow. Speechless.
I was teaching a group of Yale undergrads the other day and asking them, what's your definition of success? And they're all like, well, make a lot of money or do this or that, the other. And I said, okay, so I want you to think about the most wonderful people in your life. Think about the people that were there for you and mentored you and just saw you for who you were and just helped you along. And then it says, okay, how would you describe those people? And they would say, oh, they were loving and warm and caring. They use those kind of words. And I said, would you say that those people have had a successful impact on your life? And they were like, yeah. It's like, so what is success? Isn't it that ability to show up for people and, support them and just be there completely present in that kind of a loving way? I mean, we really have to think about what that is. And Lynn, she has a lot of love in her heart. I can tell you that. And she's showing up as a badass. Like she's a badass, you don't want to mess with her, but she's making such a difference. You should have her on your podcast.
I would welcome an intro.
Absolutely.
Well, I've really asked the main questions that I want to ask you today. Is there anything else? Is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah. Yes, I'd love to talk about relationships, Scott. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Relationships is another area of our life where we just don't get a manual for, and we want to have good relationships, and we suffer in relationships, and it's really interesting to me because oftentimes relationships are also obviously places where we can kind of project all of our own fears onto other people who they haven't done anything, and here we are, creating all the suffering. But anyway, I think a lot of people have talked about that. I'm not going to go into that in so much detail, but there is a new field of research that is really amazing called positive. It's on positive organizational scholarship. You're familiar with it a little bit? I'm sure you are, right, Scott?
I am. Yeah, I love that area. Amy Wernesky and
yes.
Jane Dudden and all that. Yeah.
Yes, I love this. So I guess I'll start with a story. So my friend Itel, she's a environmental activist, and she's often in the African jungle or in the South American jungle doing undercover investigations on deforestation and child labor. And then she'll write to these companies and tell them that what they're doing is illegal. And then anyway, she does amazing stuff, right? So she was once in an African country in the jungle doing this investigation when her car disappears, right? Her driver's gone. And she's told to get in the car with these two muscle-strapped guys in military apparel and weapons. And she knows that the government is in cahoots with the rubber company that she's investigating because they're getting kickbacks. They don't want to tell there. She has 3 hours. She's 3 hours away from the airport. So she had no choice but to get in the car with these guys who are her hitmen, right? And in the span of those 3 hours, not only did they not kill her, but she made friends with them. They even at one point held up a little sheet so she could relieve herself by the side of the road so she wouldn't go into the jungle and get bitten by snakes. Okay, so and she had got confirmation that they were meant to kill her when she got to the airport and they said to her, "Do not ever come back here. You are not safe here at all. But if you do come back, come over a land border under our protection and stay with us."
Wow.
So what happened here? Itel has something called positive relational energy. She knows how to connect with people in such a way that is life-giving. And I think we all know, this concept of energy vampires has been around for, 2 decades. And there's so much talk about it. But what we don't realize is that there's another type of relating, which is not one that sucks you dry. It's energy enhancing. And that's the key to positive relational energy. And so Kim Cameron and some of his colleagues did research on large organizations and saw that there were these pockets within the organizations that were hyper productive. It's like, what was going on here? At the center of each of these was one person. He said there was one person, and that person was giving life to everyone around them. It was like, and so he called them like positively energizing leaders. And that is really incredible, and it's something that can be taught, and Kim does. He trains people in this. He trains leaders and turns them around. You can become a positive, you can have what Itel had. Now, Itel's story was extraordinary, by the way, and I'm not saying that, other people who are in hostage situations didn't have this, because that's not true. I mean, she was very much a particular case, and she was in the process of connecting with them, able to explain what she was doing, and they realized also how she was trying to help their villages and so forth. Just want to give that caveat, but positive relational energy is something that can be trained and that anyone can learn, and that it can really catapult both personal relationships and work relationships. And it has a lot to do with the values that you have and how you live, but it also has to do with your ability to have fill your own tank and have a positively energizing relationship with your own self. So I just wanted to add that.
That's really cool. I love the phrase positively energizing leaders. I just wrote that in my notes. Good stuff. Well, Emma, thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm super grateful to chat with you, Scott. So
Me too.
we go way back, and
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Scott.
Good luck with the book.
Thank you.